morning when I put my socks on that friends this last summer gave me a pair of socks that have crosses and hearts and everything on them, but the important part is what's on the sole. It says, "Don't make me get my pastor voice out." I didn't even think about it when I was putting them on this morning. I was going to be speaking. She's like, "Oh, I'll use those today." In 2002, our center had a 3-day program that was called Free the Heart. Any of you here attend it way back when? Yep, a few of us. And some of us, do remember it. And if we chose to, we could work the program a couple of times, and then we would be allowed to experience being a family leader within a prison here in California or Nevada. And as volunteers, we had to submit all of our information to the state of California about 2 months before we actually even went into the prisons to be vetted and authorized by the prisons themselves to be admitted for the weekend. Every volunteer that went was responsible for their hotel, for their transportation, and for their food in the 3 days that it took us to get there, return, and work with the inmates. Now, the inmates loved us, and we loved them. We worked with individuals who had committed murder. We worked with fathers who had molested their own children or had beat their wives, women who had killed their abusive husbands or boyfriends, and men and women who had lost their way in life because of drugs. We cried with them. We treated them as equals while we were there. We listened without judgment when the healing journey brought up memories for them that they really didn't want to remember because they were painful and hurtful and haunting. For some of them, it was the first time they had ever experienced a positive touch in decades after being incarcerated. Or for some of them, positive touch for the first time in their entire life. And after 2 days of exercises, we would leave them hopefully feeling loved, accepted, and in some ways healthier with their lives and a little bit healed before we had met them. We were never allowed to make contact with any of them in between our visits. If we did, we were not allowed to return to that prison. Often our 6 months to annual visits that we would do at the prisons, we would return and find out who had been released, who was doing better, what changes had occurred, and just who might have been backsliding or gotten into trouble again. We also took Science of Mind magazines and a list of books for the inmates to have. Because we could not contact them, these inmates, I continued to find a way to work with those that were incarcerated. Before too long, I was writing imprisoned men who had written our centers. Ultimately, over the last 15 years or 20 years or so, I have corresponded with 4 men all over the United States. Some for only a couple of years, and the longest was for 15. In a couple of cases, I was able to talk with them on a regular basis. And when the inmates would finally express they were interested in reading, I would send them what I called the prisoner's Bible. Guess what? It was this book. I would start them with this book because it was short, it was to the point, and it talked about their thoughts and their consciousness. And we would spend a lot of time working through that book and discussing the changes that might need to happen in their life based upon what was written in the book. Back then, however, it was called As a Man Thinketh, and it was by James Allen. And that book would give us lots of things to discuss and to write about. It was originally written in 1904, and I wouldn't be surprised if Dr. Holmes hadn't read it at some point in time. The writing is truly science of mind. After we had studied and talked about As a Man Thinketh, I would send them the next one, which was This Thing Called You, which we also have in the bookstore by Ernest Holmes, because it was a succinct follow-up to what we had been working through in As a Man Thinketh. Of course, my ultimate goal was to send them the Science of Mind text, as well as the extension study course by Holmes. Currently, we're studying the book I just showed you. And Ruth Miller, who has updated it, and she's made it more current so it's easier to read. And to me, the book is all about consciousness and our thought process. If we're not willing to shift and change our consciousness, we will not be able to engage, embrace, embody the divine. That just so happens to be our theme this year. A few months ago, the practitioners did an excellent job explaining the four kingdoms of our consciousness. And the chart's going up for us right now. The charts that I'm showing you was originally created by Marcia Sutton and Lloyd Strom, and it shows the four kingdoms of consciousness. In the lower left-hand corner is the first kingdom, and we always call that Kingdom 1. And this is where we believe God is outside of ourselves. Certainly there would be no engaging, embracing, or embodying if we believed God was not within us. Our thoughts get all muddled when we're victims, and the victim consciousness in Kingdom 1, and when we're not conscious is typically when we get ourselves in trouble. Ultimately, hopefully, most people move on up to Kingdom 2, and the concept and idea of God is developed within our minds. We become the good that happens in the world because everything is done by us, and it's good. We begin to realize that nobody else can shift our thought processes and consciousness but us. And in Kingdom 3, we begin the process of clearing out our error beliefs. Emma Curtis Hopkins reminds us that when consciousness changes, form changes. When consciousness changes, form changes. So simply by shifting old beliefs or releasing our negative thoughts, we begin to see our world change. Remember the great law of life? I receive what I believe. And if I believe my life is filled with lack, for example, guess what I'm going to receive? Lack, because I have created it by my thought process. In Kingdom 4, heaven comes down through us. And this is that point where we recognize and stay in principle. This is where we release the need to judge others and things. So why should we be concerned about our consciousness? Why do we need to be concerned about negative thoughts and positive thoughts? Why do we need to have that? We create our reality. A flunky? A funky. Got it. Funky, a funky life. If we create it in our mind, we're going to end up with a funky life. What else? For others around us, absolutely. When we change our thought process, it happens to everyone around us. They can feel it, they can see it. Anything else? It is done to you as you believe, absolutely. And we're happier, the best part. Nobody else can change our consciousness. It is up to us. Spirit is always looking for an opening, and that opening comes through our individual consciousness. I used to have a friend that was always being let go from a job or fired. Usually it was the same reason. They were downsizing, or his mouth would get him into trouble. He couldn't understand why most of his jobs were only 6 months to about a year. And if we don't shift our consciousness, the pattern will continue to happen in our lives over and over and over again until we choose to heal it. And just how do we do that? We change our thought process and our consciousness. Keeping the old patterns means we are creating the same results over and over and over for you. And Emma Curtis Hopkins used to say, "How's that working for you?" You see, we behave consistently like our beliefs. And because of our subconscious, we don't know how long the negative thoughts that we might have been playing like an LP record stuck in a groove. It keeps repeating itself over and over and over again because we get stuck in our beliefs and continue to focus on it. Something must change within us. And that is our thought process. In the very opening pages of the book, author Eileen states, "Our axe springs from the hidden seeds of our thoughts and could not have appeared without them." Eileen continues his explanation by stating that the seeds we have planted are now blooming through our thoughts. The flowers of our thoughts that have been planted are either joy or they're some form of suffering. Remember the Science of Mind charts at the back of the book, the 3 layers: spirit, soul, and body, seed, soil, plant. What put into mind is planted and ultimately formulates in front of us. What we plant with our thoughts and beliefs are seeds of our tomorrows. Holmes confirms this with the simple statement in the text: life is what consciousness makes. Our conscious thoughts create the life we have, and the Bible references consciousness over 100 times. I was attracted to Hebrew 9:14. It states, "Purify our conscience from dead works." Dead works, those negative thoughts, so that we may serve the living God. When we live in the root ball of negativity, we can't serve anyone. We're too busy living in the holes that we have created and dug called victimhood. The more I studied and read about consciousness, the more I found references from sentences to entire chapters and to whole books regarding our consciousness, just not as we think. Fillmore, in the Revealing Word, states consciousness is the sense of awareness, of knowing, the knowledge of realization of any idea, object, or condition. The sum total of all ideas accumulate in and affect man's presence, beings. Neville, in The Power of Awareness, supports John Allen's writing with, "In the midst of the apparent contradictions, angiograms, and contrasts of your life, there is only one principle at work, only your consciousness operating, and your mind is always arraigned in the image of all you believe and consent to as true." Note the word consent. We have a choice. When we notice negativity rising up within our thoughts, acknowledge them. Thank that thought for coming and then release that thought. You might try a simple affirmation like, "I hear you, thank you for your perspective, and I release you in love." And then forgive yourself for having that negative thought. It's important that we don't try to push negative thoughts down and away, because you're going to go hide in your subconscious. And when we acknowledge that negative thought and release it through love, we move forward in our life in love. Depending on which study you may choose to believe, the average person has about 6,000 to 6,500 thoughts per day. Psychologists and researchers now believe that the original study that was done that said we had 60,000 thoughts per day is a myth. This was a figure floating around about the year 2000, but now research says, that's false. If the average person sleeps and needs 7 to 9 hours each day, if you get 8 hours of sleep, that means that you're awake 16 hours per day. That means you're awake 960 minutes each day, or 57,600 seconds. And when we divide the number of thoughts by minutes, we have 9.6 new thoughts every waking minute of every day, or a new thought every 6.25 seconds. Wow. In an article by Natasha Bussey, she indicated that on average, 80% of our thoughts on a daily basis are negative. I thought that was a little much. But she said of that 89 are repetitive each day. If indeed we only have 6,000 thoughts a day and 80% of them are negative, that means we're thinking 4,800 negative thoughts each day, an overwhelming number. Or 90% are repetitive, that's 5,400 thoughts that are repetitive of the tape keep playing day after day after day. The mind is like a bumblebee. It moves from flower to flower constantly, never staying in any place too long. If our mind is jumping from thought to thought, we may not even realize that our thought process is repetitive or negative. It is our choice to shift the negativity to positive and our repetitive thinking process. Allen indicates that all that you achieve and all that you fail to achieve is the direct result of your own thoughts. Everything we achieve is by a right of consciousness, and the direction, shape, and form that it takes is totally dependent on our thoughts and the actions that we take following those thoughts. Several years ago, after I had experienced a very difficult year, and after I had once again lamented to a friend how terrible life was, she was very wise and very loving, looked at me square on over the coffee cup and said, "How much longer do you want to live your life, Eileen, as a victim?" It was at that point that I made a decision. I was done with victimhood and no longer wanted to live in Kingdom One. My thinking, behavior, and beliefs had to change, and it was up to me. I was tired of being depressed and angry all the time. Here are some of the things that I found helpful in shifting my thought process and attitude. Begin each day with gratitude. I start my day now with a walk, and the first thing I do is I say out loud as I walk along how grateful I am. I'm grateful for a healthy body. I'm grateful for my home. I'm grateful for my puppies. Notice I'm not saying thank you, God, for something. Why? Because when we say thank you, God, we're actually making a dual statement, or a statement in duality. Remember, we are one with the divine, not separate. And using the words you, God, indicates we are separate from God, and we are not. Also at night, keep a little journal of 3 things you're grateful for that day. It may be something as simple as that a friend called you, or you read an interesting article. The key point is make your final thoughts before you fall asleep positive and something of gratitude. Remember at all times that you are not your thoughts. Don't allow them to become the drivers of your life. Negative thoughts are not factual, and they're not the truth of who you are. I love what Hilary LeBeau shared in an article about negative thinking. You're observing your negative thoughts and providing a safe container for them to exist, but they're not a reflection of who you are, nor do you need to take action, at least not yet. It can even be useful to name your negative thoughts. I call mine Kali, named for the Hindu goddess of destruction. I thought that was kind of cool. Whenever I start going down a negative thought spiral, I say to myself, "Oh, there's Kali. What do you have for me today, my friend?" And by putting a stable separation between the core of you and any negative thoughts, you can gain a perspective of the role that they play in your life. When we have to feel it, when we know we have to feel it to heal it. Negative thoughts invite us to explore emotions we may have stuffed down or refused to deal with. It might be grief. It might be fear or anger. Take the time to listen to your body and pinpoint where you're holding on to those emotions physically. Don't give up if you are not used to exploring your feelings. It may take time, but stick with it. It's worth the journey. When you realize you're having a negative thought, and after you've released it, replace it with a positive one. If you can, state that positive thought out loud. And whenever possible, make the positive thought like an affirmation and begin it with, "I will," or "I am." If you are thinking in terms of shoulds and shouldn'ts, it's time to release that word from your vocabulary. It's not that the intentions behind those thoughts are really bad. It's very much important for you to eat, for example, and eat healthy and be more active in exercise. What potentially is damaging, however, is when you say, "I should eat healthy," or "I should exercise more." That 6-letter word can trigger guilt and send you down a path and spiral into even more negative thoughts. As soon as you can, write down the should belief and then rewrite it as a positive statement. "I should go walk more often" can become, "I enjoy staying healthy by walking the dogs every day." I have to use that one sometimes. Trying these simple processes may transform negativity into positivity. In the 19-teens, a man by the name of Ted Shawn had entered seminary and was intent on becoming a minister. About halfway through his studies, he came down with polio. Now remember, this was long before the vaccines came along that most of us got in the 1950s and 1960s. And polio is a debilitating disease. At some point in his recovery process, he kept hearing this deep word within that kept coming to him whenever he sat in stillness. And the word was dance. Now remember that polio paralyzes parts of the body. Ted could barely move his legs. How was he ever going to possibly dance? So with great difficulty, he decided to leave seminary and study dancing. As he began to dance, slowly he began to regain the use of his legs. The incredible thing that ultimately happened, however, was he became a world-renowned dancer and choreographer, and is credited with being the father of modern dance. Ted believed that it wasn't God that healed him, but rather his embodiment within of God. That's what healed him. Deep healing transpired when we're willing to look at ourselves and say, this is not working, I need to change, then something usually happens. I watched it happen with the inmates. And when we give form to the divine within, all things are possible. So if you find yourself in that place of negativity, seeking to end them and find something new, remember we receive what we believe, and let's plant new seeds and open our minds and our hearts and our souls to embody newness and the wholeness waiting to be within. This is the truth in my life, and this is the truth in yours, and so it is. Amen. Dallas?